Long before the first animals moved across land, before forests, before even the earliest trees stretched toward the sky, Earth was already alive in a quiet, unfamiliar way. A billion years ago, the planet was not empty, but it was almost unrecognizable. There were no flowers, no grass, no leaves rustling in the wind. The world was green, but not in any way we would understand today. What existed then was something far more ancient, more subtle, and in many ways more mysterious. If you could stand on Earth a billion years ago, you wouldn't hear birds or insects. The silence would feel immense. The land itself would appear barren at first glance, rocky, exposed, and vast. But look closer and life would reveal itself in thin layers clinging to surfaces, in shallow waters glowing faintly under sunlight, and in microscopic communities slowly transforming the planet. This was a time deep within what scientists call the Proterozoic Aeon, a stretch of Earth's history that lasted for nearly 2 billion years. By this point, life had already existed for a long time, but it was almost entirely microscopic. The vegetation of this era was not made of trees or plants as we know them. Instead, it was composed of simple organisms, algae, bacterial mats, and early eukaryotic life that would lay the foundation for everything that followed. In the oceans, life was more visible, though still subtle. Thick mats of cyanobacteria, which are also called blue-green algae, grew in large areas of shallow seas. These organisms formed layered structures that grew slowly over time, trapping sediment and building formations known as stromatolites. From a distance, these might look like smooth, rounded rocks, but up close they were alive, quietly performing one of the most important processes in Earth's history. Through photosynthesis, these early organisms released oxygen into the atmosphere. Over millions of years, this gradual release would completely transform the planet's air, making it possible for more complex life to evolve. But at the time, the process was slow and invisible. There were no dramatic changes, no sudden bursts of life, just a steady, persistent reshaping of the environment. The oceans themselves would have looked different. Without modern marine plants, the water may have appeared murkier in some regions and clearer in others, depending on microbial activity. Colors would shift subtly, greens, browns, and faint reds, depending on the types of algae present. Sunlight filtering through the water would illuminate drifting colonies of microscopic life, forming delicate, almost cloud-like patterns beneath the surface. On land, the story becomes even more unusual. For a long time, scientists believed that the continents were completely barren during this period. But growing evidence suggests that life had already begun to colonize land, even in extremely simple forms. Thin microbial crusts, composed of bacteria and possibly early algae, may have spread across rocks and soil. These crusts would have been fragile, easily disturbed, and almost invisible unless examined closely. Imagine walking across ancient terrain where life exists as a thin film beneath your feet. The ground might appear dry and lifeless, yet just below the surface, microscopic organisms are actively growing, dividing, and interacting with minerals. These early land communities likely played a crucial role in breaking down rock, contributing to soil formation, and preparing the land for future plant life. Among the most important developments of this time was the rise of eukaryotic cells with a nucleus and internal structures. These were more complex than earlier life forms and would eventually give rise to algae, fungi, plants, and animals. Some of the earliest multicellular algae may have already begun to appear in the oceans, forming simple filaments or sheets. These early algae were not plants in the modern sense. They had no roots, no stems, no leaves. They absorbed nutrients directly from their surroundings and relied entirely on water to support their structure. Yet they represented a crucial step toward the vegetation we recognize today. Evidence suggests that some of these organisms could grow several centimeters in size, large enough to be seen with the naked eye, drifting gently in ancient seas. The environment itself was also very different. The atmosphere contained far less oxygen than today, though levels were slowly rising. Carbon dioxide concentrations were higher, contributing to a greenhouse climate that kept the planet relatively warm despite a fainter sun. However, this warmth was not constant. Earth experienced dramatic climate shifts during the Proterozoic, including periods of global glaciation. At times, the planet may have been nearly completely encased in ice, a condition commonly known as snowball Earth. During these periods, vegetation would have been pushed to the margins, surviving in pockets of open water, beneath ice layers, or near volcanic regions where heat created habitable environments. These extreme conditions likely drove evolutionary changes, forcing organisms to adapt in ways that would shape the future of life. When the ice retreated, life would expand again, slowly reclaiming the oceans and, to a limited extent, the land. Each cycle of change added complexity, introducing new forms and interactions, such as the emergence of diverse plant species and the development of intricate food webs. Though still simple by modern standards, these early ecosystems were becoming more dynamic. One of the most intriguing aspects of this ancient vegetation is how alien it would appear to us. Without the familiar structures of modern plants, the landscape would lack vertical complexity. There were no forests, no canopies, no layers of vegetation. Life existed primarily in flat, low-lying forms, mats, films, and soft-bodied colonies. Even the colors might surprise us. While green would be present due to chlorophyll, other pigments could create patches of purple, red, or brown. These colors served different purposes, helping organisms capture various wavelengths of light or protect themselves from intense radiation. The result would be a patchwork of subtle hues across rocks and water surfaces. Reproduction in this early organism was also very different. Many relied on simple cell division, while others used spores or released reproductive cells into the water. There were no seeds, no flowers, no pollinators. Everything depended on the surrounding environment, currents, chemical signals, and chance encounters. Despite their simplicity, these organisms were not isolated. They formed interconnected systems, exchanging nutrients and influencing each other's growth. Microbial communities could be highly structured, with different layers performing different functions. Some organisms captured sunlight, others processed waste products, and together they created stable, self-sustaining ecosystems. Over immense spans of time, these systems would become more complex. Genetic innovations, environmental pressures, and chance events all contributed to gradual change, leading to the development of new species and adaptations that would eventually support more complex ecosystems. By the end of the Proterozoic, around 541 million years ago, the stage was set for a dramatic transformation, the emergence of more complex multicellular life, including the earliest animals. But the vegetation of 1 billion years ago did not disappear entirely. It evolved. Modern algae still carry many of the traits seen in their ancient ancestors. Cyanobacteria continue to exist, playing vital roles in ecosystems around the world. Even the oxygen in our atmosphere is a legacy of those early photosynthetic organisms. In a sense, the world of 1 billion years ago is not completely lost. It survives in fragments, in microscopic life, in chemical signatures preserved in ancient rocks, and in the biological processes that continue to sustain life today. Nevertheless, if we could truly witness that world, it would feel both familiar and profoundly strange. A quiet planet, covered not in forests but in films of life, where the most important changes happen slowly, almost invisibly. A world where vegetation did not tower above the ground but lay close to it, shaping the future in ways that would only become clear hundreds of millions of years later. There is something humbling in imagining such a world. It reminds us that the complexity we see today, towering trees, vast forests, diverse ecosystems, emerged from something far simpler. That life does not begin with grandeur, but with persistence. And perhaps most striking of all is this: the plants we know today, the landscapes we depend on, the air we breathe, all of it traces back to those ancient, quiet beginnings. To a time when life was small, slow, and almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change an entire planet. The earth did not become green overnight. It became green gradually, through countless generations of organisms that lived and died without ever being seen. Their world was not dramatic, but it was transformative. 1 billion years ago, vegetation did not look like forests or fields. It looked like a possibility, spread thin across a silent world, waiting for time to do the rest.